Welcome to Next to Madison, a podcast to help you live your best life.
Welcome back to another episode of Next to Madison. I'm your host, Madison Malloy. Just a quick reminder, please remember to subscribe to our new feed and also share, tag, follow, all that good stuff so we can continue bringing amazing episodes. But on this episode, we are talking about leadership skills, mindset, and financial advice. We're talking with an author, Mike Keys, who is also a financial advisor and also a leadership coach. We're talking about the traits of top leaders, discipline versus motivation, his favorite books to improve your mindset, and the importance of emotional intelligence, pardon me. It is a packed-filled episode of everything that everyone needs to just give them that extra motivation and that extra push. It's a great conversation. So please enjoy and please share and like, follow, and all that good stuff. We'll be right back with our guest on this episode of Next to Madison.
Hey, it's Madison Malloy. I just wanted to remind you to make sure you grab a copy of my book, Time to Lighten the Fuck Up. It is a great, funny self-help book that is going to help you get out of your own way. I have already helped thousands and thousands of people, and they are on their way to living their dream life, and I want every listener to be able to live their dream life as well. So grab a copy of the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or even the audiobook on Audible. Now back to the show.
Okay, welcome back. We are with our amazing guest today where we are talking about leadership and the financial markets. Yes, this is going to be a packed-filled episode with useful information. So with that being said, I'd like to bring on our guest of the hour. We've got Mike Keys, financial advisor, author, and leadership coach. Mike, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am great. Thanks for having me. This is so much fun.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So you wrote a book a little while ago called Lead Brilliantly. Can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind that? And then we'll go into traits.
So my former boss and I really saw a gap in the leadership growth and development piece among many leaders that we were already doing one-on-one coaching and workshops with. And so we thought it would be great to create our own almost working manual from which we could encapsulate the best leadership ideas that we think are needed by, especially newer leaders, so that they could, have a kind of a blueprint to work from. And so we sat down and we spent about a year and a half writing different chapters. I'd write a chapter, he'd write a chapter. We kind of broke out the topics, and then we would tell stories from our personal experience that, where we saw, a young leader, succeed and learn from something that we were trying to teach and coach them. So the book became, it's not written as a manual. It's written as a bunch of stories, almost, miniature success stories, and some failures in there. So some people that failed to grasp what we were trying to teach them and where that led them. So we wrote this book as a way to use in workshops that we're going to roll out to other leaders.
Okay, that's amazing. And so what do you find makes a great leader? Like, what are the traits?
Yeah. So one of my kind of pet peeves is, and I say to people all the time, it always starts with how much you care, right? So how much you care really matters. My daughter is a registered dietitian, and she works with a lot of CEOs as a registered dietitian, interestingly enough. And I said, CEO versus your typical client, what's the difference between the CEOs and everybody else? She goes, it really struck me. She goes, the CEOs were always interested in me as a person. She goes, not just what I could do to help them, get where they needed to get with their fitness goals or their diet goals. It was always, they were interested in me as a person. She goes, so it became very evident to me that, part of the reason that these CEOs were so successful and how they got to where they got is their deep personal interest in other people. So I thought that was very insightful for her to share that, because I would say that's probably number one, right? Your deep need to really care and be interested in other people.
No, and that's a great thing, because they always say, like, people will like you more anyways if you let them talk about themselves. And so you want, as a leader, you want your people to like you, because then they're naturally going to work harder for you.
Right.
And want to show up. So what are some other traits that make a good leader?
Yeah.
That you found?
Yeah, so I think the number two thing that I see among great leaders is that they're really good at managing themselves, right? They're good self leaders, right?
Uh-huh.
They're disciplined, they're focused, they're organized. They know how to take care of their own business, right? They understand their own strengths and weaknesses, and they work at those things. They're constantly learning, they're constantly reading, they're constantly, continuing to go to workshops and work with other leaders to get better at what they do. So I think the second thing is that they really do focus on themselves, right? First and
Yeah.
foremost, because if you can't get yourself in order, you can't really lead others, and people will not follow you if they see you, not walking the walk and talking the talks. So,
Right, exactly. It's called like lead by example, right? Like you
correct.
gotta, yeah.
That's
I
exactly right.
and it's the discipline and the motivation and yeah, I think it's so key. And I think a lot of companies now are really prioritizing personal development because they realize how important mindset is to building future leaders, but also building strong employees and happy
Yes.
employees.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely agree with that.
yeah. So how much like mindset training do you do and do you coach your clients to do as well?
Yeah. So I spend a fair amount of time. I give away a lot of books. I share a lot of books. We have a group of guys that meet every Thursday night, and then I have other small mentoring groups that where we're sharing with each other. It's not like I am the mentor and they're the followers. It's not like that. It's more of a
Yeah.
sharing group where we sit together and we share best practices and best ideas and what's working for you, what's not working, what are you struggling with, why are you struggling, and we share practical advice on how to address those issues. But I probably read at least 1 to 2 books a week. They're not
Wow.
all self development, but I'm reading books all of the time, and I'm taking continuing education, and I'm taking leadership and development programs, and so it's a constant, and I think you have to be a lifelong learner, to be a leader. Even if you're not a formal leader, right? Because as I tell everybody, everybody's a leader. It's just some are, have a title that go with it, and many don't. And so everybody's a leader. And so, how you do what you do and how well you focus on developing yourself is the first step.
Do you have a mentor that you coach with as well?
I do. I actually have a few. So both my former bosses, one is I think he just turned 85, and the other one just turned 78. So I go see those guys every month, and we have lunch, and we share
Yeah.
stories, and we some of it's war stories from yesteryear, some of it's really this is a situation I find myself in today, and so I lean on those guys, right? So they were my bosses when they were working at different times. But these were guys who I deeply respected, that I think were way ahead of their time. They didn't come at it from the old school hierarchy approach, where I'm the boss, you're the subordinate, do this, do this, do this. They came at it from what I call the player coach.
Yeah.
They were people that really gravitated towards the coaching way of leadership, which really came around in the 90s. It's starting to come into vogue. But a lot of leaders said they were gravitating towards it. It's not what they did, right? They still believed in I'm the boss, you're the subordinate. Even after these guys retired, I had bosses who were still doing it from the 1960s and 70s playbook. So yeah, these two guys are terrific. I still lean into them, and then I have a couple others, younger folks who are in their 30s and 40s, who I think do a really good job of helping me understand their generation. And I think it's really
Yeah.
important, right? Because I just turned 60, so I'm kind of I'm not 80, I'm not 70, but I'm not 50, 40, or 30, and so I do hang around with some really stellar leaders in their 30s and 40s who really have helped me to understand the importance of things like culture, for example, right? Corporate culture is been a kind of a thing people talk about, but it's not something that a lot of companies do really, really well. And I think these younger leaders really understand the importance of corporate culture,
Yeah.
making sure that you're investing, you're taking the time to know where people are at, what's going on in their personal lives without crossing any lines, but really knowing people at a deep level. And they've been very helpful to me to become much more sensitive, relational in the day to day, with the next generation.
Yeah, no, and that's so important. And it's great that you're aware of that because I think so many people get so stuck in their ways that
Yeah,
they don't realize that these generations, they were just raised differently and
yeah,
things were very different. And it can be a difficult hurdle when you've got multiple generations running through a company and how people
yeah,
think and feel. But yeah, being open about those and learning about why people may think the way that they do. I do feel that our Gen Z is a little more sensitive than most of the other generations.
that's well
Uh,
said.
yeah. So it's kind of like suck it up, buttercup. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
life
right,
ain't fair. So, the quicker we realize that, I mean, but you can't fault them because that was the trophy
right.
generation of everybody gets a trophy. And I think the next generation, which I think is Gen Alpha, is those parents are starting to realize, like, oh God, we don't want our kids to end up like this. No, if you suck, you suck. And I think it's important to tell people when they suck.
Yeah,
I think it's important because then you're like, okay, if I suck, how do I get better? But if you're just good all the time, well, then you have no room to grow.
right,
So it's
right.
like that constructive feedback. But I think the problem is too, is like so many people are afraid to speak up because, they're in such an offended culture that
Right.
it's like, what if I say the wrong thing or somebody takes us the wrong way? It's like how as leaders in corporate America now do they protect people's difference of opinions to where the, annoying naysayer that's like, I'm offended by everything, which is, by the way, the number one narcissistic trait. Next time somebody tells me they're offended, I'm going to be like, well, you are officially a narcissist. There's the door. Goodbye. Because you just took something and made it all about you. So it's the number one narcissistic behavior is what I've learned in my personal development and through
Wow.
my own coaching. Yeah, because you take stuff, and especially being a comedian, you take stuff and you make it all about you. But
Right.
yeah, how do you find that they deal with that? It's like a bunch of
Yeah.
crybabies.
Yeah. Well, carefully. So I think a big part of it is carefully. One of the things I learned from one of the youngest leaders that as I like to say, we do a lot of sharing, and I do a lot of one-on-one with this young gentleman, 37 years old, super smart, ridiculously smart, and one of the things that I've really learned from him is when people get sensitive, rather than react to it, to ask questions. And so he's great at that. So when
I
somebody
love
asks you a
that.
question, don't respond. Ask them, why are you asking that question? Why is this coming up? Tell me more about that. It seems like there's something really important there for you. Tell me more about it. So it's digging a lot deeper, or peeling the onion back, as we used to call it, and really trying to understand what's going on underneath, because there's so many layers to this sensitivity that you better understand, or you're never going to quite figure it out, and you're going to make assumptions, and those assumptions are a best guess that is probably going to be wrong 80% of the time.
Yeah.
So
And I
yeah,
think also like having good leadership skills whether you're in a leadership position or not, I think
right,
is key because I think it applies to every area of your life.
yeah,
Like when you said at the beginning, like the trait of a CEO is like really being interested in people's lives. I think that's just a general networking and also relationship building thing, like with your
yeah.
friends or your loved ones or your family.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of work been done in this area too. I mean, Dan Goleman, the emotional intelligence guy, he's got all these books on that.
Yeah.
I've read most of them, and he's terrific. I tell people all the time, it's your emotional maturity that's going to determine how successful you are over time, not your intellect, right? Intellect will only take you so.
Yes.
I've worked with lots of really smart people that don't have emotional maturity, and they falter and fail, and they don't understand why if I'm so smart and I'm so hardworking and I'm so ambitious, am I not moving up the food chain? And it's because and it's not a popularity contest, but you do have to navigate the politics of the day, and you do have to navigate the personalities of the people that you're working with. And I got to believe it's probably one of my favorite questions for a person in your line of work, the comedian piece especially, is how do you navigate the deep sensitivity that seems to have infiltrated your work, right? People,
Yeah.
ooh, I take deep offense to that, right? It's,
You make
how
fun
do
of
you
them.
navigate
You
that?
make fun of
Yeah,
them. I think when this whole like offended cancel culture like kind of started, these
right,
artists that were getting really attacked like kind of bowed down to the mob and like
right,
apologized, and that really didn't work. And then when people realize like, no, you stand up for what you believe, you state your thing, you don't make it, you stay in your power.
right,
Um, that's when it was like we finally got more of a pushback on the other side to
right.
where, but it's like one of those things like emotional maturity, what you're talking about is so key, but it's like with this whole like offended culture and woke, I mean, the pendulum can only go so far. So I think it really went like this and now it's snapping back. It just
Yeah,
has to. It can't just keep going. And so I think that a lot of people are realizing or maybe becoming more emotionally mature and saying like, is this really going to get me to where I need to go? Or am I going to create more enemies because of
right,
it? So I
right.
think, yeah, emotional maturity is so key, not only in work, but in relationships, because there's always going to be things that bother you.
Yep,
But it's also like, for me, like one of the biggest things is like not personalizing
right,
everything. Sometimes when somebody just seems like, are they upset with you? You can ask the question, but like don't personalize it. Most of the time, even when somebody's rude to you, it has nothing to
right,
do with you. It's something
right,
like else that's going on. So the less we can personalize things, I think the more emotional maturity we're going to have,
right. Absolutely,
you know,
absolutely.
which is
Yeah,
key. So you are also a financial advisor. So I kind of
I
want to
am.
flip into that because we are in crazy times. We're in an election year and the markets are cooking, rolling. We got a big crypto
Yeah,
bull market. But the economy is in the shitter.
yeah,
So, and there's so much crap going on, and we keep printing money, and nobody can afford anything. And people, the credit card debt is the highest it's ever been. But yet we have this huge market. Now, I know that the markets don't always correlate with the economy exactly, but
sure.
like, I just feel like we're just in this impending thing that's just gonna collapse. And don't be
Yeah,
scared when I say that, people listening, because the most millionaires and billionaires are created during collapses, not during bull markets. So
yeah,
use this knowledge to educate yourself and win, is what I like to
yeah,
say. So what are
yeah,
you seeing? Like how do, nothing makes sense to me.
yeah. Well, in the short term, I'm probably less concerned about the short term, and more concerned about the long term. And so, the big breakouts are, on a relative basis, interest rates, while they're higher than they've been, they're still a lot lower than they were 2 years ago, right? So
Okay.
inflation has come down. Unemployment is reasonable at 3.5% or so, and the financial markets have kind of rebounded from the pandemic, right? So the pandemic created all sorts of crazy things, and there was a tremendous amount of debt taken on by the government to try to bail everybody out and flush, you know, all of the problems away.
Yeah,
Well, the problems just got transferred right from one bucket to the other, and
exactly.
one bucket is so we're not nobody's hurting currently, but now we have this tremendous national debt. And that's a big problem, and that's the long-term problem that I am most concerned about, for our economy on a long-term basis. Because when you drag debt along with you, it's a ball and chain, and it slows everything down, and it slows your growth,
Yeah.
and sooner or later, you have to pay the piper. You can't just keep running up the credit card and expect that things are going to be great. But in the short term, some of what they did was very useful and good, and it helped to stabilize people's incomes and kept people from losing their homes, and so a lot of good came from it. But there were mistakes made, and hopefully they'll learn from that for next time. But on a relative basis, people are doing okay, right? Financially, people have more money in the banks than they've had in a long time. I do see that personal debt is back on the uptick, and that's a long term problem. Um, but but by and large, people, even with all the inflation, people are able to pay their bills, put food on the table, roof over their head. Harder and harder to buy a house right now because of the elevated interest rates.
Yeah.
But interest rates should come down. So on a short-term basis, economy is actually not as bad as people think. It's actually, in a relatively decent spot. But on a long-term basis, there's our politicians have got to make the decision to work together and start bringing that debt back down. And to do that, they got to
Let's stop
stop
printing
spending.
money because we're
You got to stop
screwing.
spending. Yeah,
Yeah, we're screwing these younger generations. I mean,
yeah,
you're gonna have, I mean, a shack is gonna be $1 million,
yeah. Yeah, it's
and
going to be
it's
very, very challenging in the future. And so, you can grow your economy you can outgrow your debt, which is, part of the concept that I think they're using. I personally am not convinced that, a group of lawyers trying to be business people in Washington, D.C. really know what they're doing
right.
as a group. And I'm staying completely bipartisan as it relates to this. But, I would much rather see, financial professionals that really understand, accounting professionals that really
Yes.
understand how an economy runs, and business professionals that know how to run a business for a profit and minimize
Yep.
the debt, because we have to rein in our spending. We have to do that at some point to get things
Right. Because
back in order. Yep.
we're just hurting generations. So
Yep.
as an advisor, what would you advise somebody to do to keep themselves safe,
Yep.
but also earn money to beat out inflation?
Yeah. So again, it depends on their age and stage of life, the stability of their career. If you're in a career that is
Yeah.
constantly changing, or the turnover is really high, you got to be more careful than say a school teacher, where you probably your career is probably fairly stable. Once you have that job, it's rare that you lose that job. But it's the same stuff that we've been preaching for 50, 100 years, right? Have enough money in savings, so if you lose your job, you're going to be okay. That you can cover 6 months' expenses,
Yeah.
out of liquid money, right? Start there. Whittle your debts down, especially short-term, high expensive debt, right? So get the car paid off as quickly as you can. Don't take on a lot of consumer short-term debt for furniture and other small-term projects. Try to pay cash for all the small short-term stuff. Don't put $5,000 vacation on your credit card, right? Save the money, then go on the vacation. So it's just all those little things that are the first way that you protect yourself. And once you've done that, start investing, and you got to get to 10% of your income, right? Whatever you're making, try to put 10% of it away. And if you do that for 30 or 40 years, you're going to be fine in most cases, right? So
Yeah.
it's keep your debt down, have some savings, save and save and save and save, and invest normally, right? These folks that are, shooting for the moon with Bitcoin and without all of their investment money, it looks great on paper. You have these instant millionaires, but most of them, bought Bitcoin too late and lost money, right? For many of them, I won't even say most of them.
Well, now
Many
we're all
people,
up.
yeah.
I was like,
So,
everybody's all up again.
yeah, so that the old standby stocks, bonds, and real estate are still great places to put money, and trying to buy speculative investments, while fun and interesting, is rarely going to get you where you want to be. So that's avoiding that, maybe not altogether, but at least minimizing the damage you can do to yourself by buying speculation is the other thing I tell people. Just don't do it, or minimize the amount of money you put on speculative stuff, because because I'm sure everybody is, and I get them, you get them. I'm sure you see them on Facebook. The latest AI stock that's going to make you an overnight millionaire, right? And it's like, maybe. I doubt it.
You just know,
To
yeah, you
try
never
to,
know. I think the key is with
yeah,
those is like knowing when to get out, you
right,
know? And because
yeah,
I think people are like, sometimes people get too greedy and they're like, I'm not getting out till it's this. And I've done that a lot with some stuff. I
right,
mean, luckily everything came back, but
right.
I was like, God, I should have gotten out at that point, bought back in, you know? But if everybody knew the timing perfectly, well, we'd all be sitting on yachts, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
But yeah, I think also, financial stuff also comes down to your mindset. That is a big thing. I think people's either struggle or abundance really comes down to their thinking,
Yeah.
and how they think about money. And as if it's an always a scarce thing, you're always going to have that showing up in your reality versus
Right.
a very abundant world. So try to, I always tell people try to shut off the news and stop comparing yourself to other people and just realize that money is a beautiful energy that
Yeah.
we are all capable of having and having a ton of. God wants us to be abundant and help people and help ourselves. To, that's really where mindset comes down, you
Right.
know, because if you're always waiting
Now,
for the other shoe to drop, well, you're constantly going to be
now,
attracting that type of stuff into your life.
yeah. Now I've heard that you were in financial services before, and
Hmm.
now you're a comedian. How does one make that leap of faith, and just becoming a comedian just is intriguing to me, right? My son's a musician, and he's got his own band, and I've kind of watched the evolution of that. But the
Yeah.
entertainment industry is such a difficult and unique industry that
Oh.
takes tremendous, what I would call courage, risk taking,
Hmm.
intestinal fortitude. How does one become a comedian, and what prompted you to go in that direction?
Well, I mean, luckily, and I say luckily because sometimes like your hand is forced to go off on your own and take that risk. I was a bond trader and we were dealing with residential mortgage-backed securities, and I was involved in the crash and when everything was kind of imploding around us due to what we were buying. Um, it just kind of naturally kind of led to this evolution of just, watching people who had it all start to lose a
Yeah.
lot. And I realized I'm like, God, what is life? Is it sitting here the rest of my life just waiting for somebody to determine my bonus and telling me when I can and can't take vacation? And is
Right.
this the life I want? And are these people actually happy? And I was always the funny one, and some of my friends would be like, I was the one that they'd be like, okay, you're gonna meet my friend. She's really, really nice, but sometimes shit comes out of her mouth and you're like, what the fuck? So it made more sense to I was like, well, that's just who I am. That's just who God intended me to be. And so I just decided to take the leap of faith, not realizing what a long road ahead of me was. And my mindset became more scarce and more scarce and more scarce. So having to retrain my mind to get into more opportunity and be open to things and not so closed-minded, like it's this or nothing, and I'm going to see this through. There were so many other opportunities within that came from comedy, public speaking, writing books, creating television shows, podcasts, all these different things that open so many doors for me. So I just say, like, you know what, like you can't take the money with you, like as long as you can survive. I would encourage everybody just to take the risk and just do what they love, because you don't want to get to your deathbed where you're going, I wish I had the balls to do that.
Right.
And, that was kind of my decision. And trust me, there's days where I think about my life going, I wonder what I would be if I was still on Wall Street or if I had stuck out that path. And I know I'd be a lot more miserable. I know it wouldn't be as interesting. And I know nobody would be fucking talking about me. At least I do
Right.
something where people are talking, and I like to be talked about, in
Right.
a good way. Um,
Right.
but every day, some days, as an entrepreneur, there's days that are still a struggle. Days, months where you feel flush and loaded, and months where you feel destitute.
Right.
Um, but it's bracing those storms and putting away a certain amount of money so you can get through those periods. Um, but also like for me, it's like as long as I'm adding value to people's lives every day, like I coach, I'm a mindset coach as well, um, then I've done a good job. And so some days I realize that like my money's not as high as it was last month or this month, like it's an ebb and flow. But my karma points with God are unbelievable. So I know that that's going to pay in dividends to me. You got to just keep doing what you're doing. And if you love what you do, you're able to kind of brace those storms.
Yeah.
My financial wealth manager, is like, oh my God, somebody saw a TV show and, but I'm like, listen, I'm fine.
Right.
But yeah, it's all about taking the risk, which comes down
Yeah.
to mindset, which comes down to also leadership skills. I mean, I have to be a leader for people that follow me and listen to me, and also clients that I coach. Um, and just kind of, being authentic, I think is another key thing. And I think the reason that people that I coach relate to me so well is because I've been through the shit.
Right.
And I'm not just somebody who's like spewing out of a textbook. It's like, no, 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 this is literally what will happen. And then you become suicidal and you realize it's either that or I change. And that
Yeah.
was my story.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the real life experience is huge, right? For
Yeah.
coaching people. Yeah. You can't, you can't draw on a book, right? You have to know it. You have to have lived something or some things, to be able to help people, other people get through similar things. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
yeah. And it's like being an inspiration. Like if they can do it, I can do it. And that's what the example that you want to set, which comes down to leadership, you know?
Yeah.
That's why I think
So
like
what was the
in
hardest?
my opinion, all leaders should have should be risky, should take risks,
Yeah. Yeah.
and fail and not be afraid to fail.
Yeah. So in that vein, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to overcome, and what's the biggest risk you ever took?
Say the hardest thing I had to overcome and really retrain my mind was my lack of self-worth. And because on the outside, I looked like I was well taken care of, very rich, prosperous human being, but really the reality was a very different picture for a long time. And struggling and not being able to ask for help and to be able to change that self-image and build up that self-worth. And for me, a lot of it was like turning to faith. And I use this example a lot with my clients, but it was something that my mother said to me that totally changed my life, which was she said, every time you talk negatively about yourself and degrade yourself, you might as well slap God straight in the face because he made you perfect in his eyes. And so
Right.
you are bashing his perfect creation. And that was like such a wake up call to be like, oh my gosh, like, these things don't happen overnight. It's constant repetition and doing things and taking risks to like build that confidence. But yeah, I would say the biggest risk I took was walking away from a very high paying job on Wall Street to
Right.
talk about my vagina on stage. I mean, that has it paid off? Yes, totally the way I wanted it to. It's on its way. What was the biggest risk you felt you took?
It's a great question. Well, to become a financial advisor is a major risk in and of itself, right? Because you have to build the business from
Yeah.
scratch. But I would say for me, the biggest risk along the way, I woke up at 36 years old, and I decided to end my management career. So, like you, I walked away from a very high paying, very secure kind of position, to start over again, right? As an advisor at 36, I had the experience at that point. So I'd already been in the business for 12 years. But giving away, giving up the high paying job with all the benefits and all the prestige and
Yeah.
all the title that came with it, as a manager, field vice president, they, give you a really nice title, to becoming an advisor again. That was very risky. And then,
Yeah.
we had the lifestyle that came with it. And so, I, thankfully had, created enough wealth by then to get through the transition. I said to my
Yeah.
wife, I go, well, I got 5 years to make this work. If I don't, I'll take another job, or we'll probably have to sell the house. And she goes, just do it. And I said, okay, let's do it.
Oh,
And so we did. And, with three kids and they were, youngish, 10, 12, 14, something like that. And so we did it. And, I just, started from scratch all over again. And it worked. It all worked out. And, there were I can tell you lots of stories along the way. And there were, lots of adventures along the way. But
yeah.
yeah, there were times that I thought, wow, this is not going to work. And I just like would get up every morning and just, put in another 12 hours and see what happens. And, at the end of the day, like you said, um, you know, God doesn't make any mistakes, right? He points
Yeah.
us in a direction. He opens doors for us and lets us walk through those doors. And, thankfully he opened plenty for me and brought lots of opportunities my way. And it just, yeah, totally meaningfully blessed in big ways. So yeah, it's been great.
That's amazing. And it probably came down a lot to your mindset too. It sounded like you had a great support system with your wife encouraging
Yep.
you.
Yep.
But also you believed in yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and yes, but there are, as you know, right, there are days that you
You
probably
question
walk
everything. Yeah.
days and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But that's where as those monthly meetings and those lunches with my old bosses, right?
Yeah.
I'd go meet with these wise sages and and then get a bucket load of what I would call positive reinforcement. These are guys that believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and they just dump a bucket of that on you for an hour and a half and go,
Uh,
you're great. I know you're great. You're going to be great. It's going to be fine. Go do what you do best. You have this
yeah.
skill and that skill and this skill and that skill. And, and you just walk away feeling totally inspired. And you're like, okay, get back on the horse. Let's go. And so, yeah, those two guys were very instrumental, at some dark times during that first 5-year transition. So yeah, it was. I'm just so thankful that those two guys still in my life. But yeah, 24 years ago, totally
Oh my
believed in. So
gosh.
it was awesome.
Yeah. No, and it's so important to have those people. And like
Yeah,
when you find people that do believe in you, it's keep them close. Check in
yeah,
on them and check on how
yeah,
they're doing because they're still human as well, even though they might have figured it out before you.
yeah,
Um, but everyone's kind of got that story. But that's
yeah.
amazing. And so, how would you to kind of leave off this episode here? What is two things that you would give our listeners that you think will make a positive impact on their life?
Yeah. Um, so I think it's funny because I'm writing my next book, and it's not a business book. It's really a legacy book to my children, right? It's a book that
Excellent.
I'm writing for their benefit, and and I've already I've kind of, you create the chapters, you know what you want to talk about, and now it's filling in all the details, and when I think about my kids, what I want them to know from their dad, from myself, is that I totally believe in them, right? And so to our point, your point, my point, find people that believe in you, right? Because God doesn't make any mistakes, and you are created to be this beautiful, wonderful thing with your own unique skills and experiences and abilities, and your life is an accumulation of experiences that are meant for something better and meant for everyone to share in, right? So
Yeah.
your comedic
I
skills
love
were never an accident. They were there, and lots of experiences that baked into that, right? And we
Yeah.
can talk about the dark side of comedy, right? Which when you read about comedians as a group, a lot of them have lived hard, difficult
Hmm.
moments throughout their lives that have led them to be, the funny person in the room, right? So that's a,
Yes.
a terrific, amazing thing. And, so I tell people, my kids, what I want them to know is the experiences that you're going through, good, bad, and other, are all being built up so that you can become the best person that you can be. Those experiences all matter. And those things are going to come to fruition for something greater than you ever expected down the road. And some of that will be
That's
greater for
excellent.
yourself, and some of it will be greater for humanity, and some of it will be greater so that you can pull others through, that'll go through a similar experience. So I think that's
I
a
love
very,
that.
yeah, it's a very important thing that you value and learn to embrace all of your experiences, because they're being baked into you for something greater. So I think that's an important thing, that I would love people
That's
to
yeah.
to, to understand about life in general. Um,
It's all like situations are lessons. They're
yep.
blessings and lessons, and they make you who you are. And to
Yeah.
not discount the hard times. The hard times actually can have more of an impact on your life than the
Yeah.
good times if
Yeah.
you choose to
On
see
the
it that
flip
way.
side of that, I think, the exact flip of that is that, be nicer to people than you think you should, right? Because
Oh, I like that
anybody,
too.
yeah, anybody who's not nice to you, it has nothing to do with you, right? It's
Yeah.
something that they're going through. It's something that they're
As
dealing with.
earlier, yeah.
And be more compassionate than you ever thought possible, because when somebody loses their stuff on me, my first response is, I wonder what's going on, right? It's not, oh, I can't believe they said that. I don't become indignant about it. I become
Right.
compassionate. My first answer is compassion. Your first response to anybody who's expressing negativity needs to be compassion, because they're going through something. They're
Oh,
facing a
yeah.
difficulty that you know nothing about. And I always tell people, if you have friends that have had no difficulties in their lives, you just don't know them very well. They're
Yeah,
really not your
exactly.
friends. They're really not your friends until you know all the hardships, or even some of the top highlights of their hardships. That you don't know somebody, right? Everybody
Yeah.
faces significant deep dive hardship in their life. I've never met a soul that, once I got to know them well, has not faced deep dive hardship in their life. And so, learn to be more compassionate is really my message. And I think that's so important, because our
Yeah.
country has gone so far in the other direction on
Oh,
that, right? Yeah,
completely.
it's insane how far we've gone in the other direction. And you just don't know. The louder the people are, the more compassionate I think you need to be, because they've experienced more pain than others. So that's
Very
that's
well
the other
said.
side of that. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And so where can people find your book and learn more about you, Mike?
Yeah, so the book is available on Apple, so you can go right onto the Apple, what do they call the Apple books, and just go on there. It's available, and that's I still think it's a terrific book with great stories. Look
Yeah.
for my next book in the next year or so. I hope to finish that up
Excellent.
this year. So that's the plan, and that book will be, again, much more on what I just talked about, things like compassion, things about respecting and treating others well, and learning from your experiences that
Yeah.
your life is being baked for something really important down the road, right? Probably my favorite book, and
I love that.
I talk about this book all the time, and it's called A Prayer for Owen Meany, and it's this great book, and by a very famous author, and this book is about this young man who understands that all the crazy little things that he's learning to do and difficulties that he's being set up for something important. He just doesn't know what it is. Right? My whole life is leading to something big. I just don't know what it is. And so, so the book is all about, you're watching this all unfold, and then the big moment happens, and it all comes together. And so it's just a really, really, great book. I recommend it to everybody. Read this book,
Yeah.
and you'll begin to understand how your own life is this preparation for something bigger and more
I
important,
love
right? It's probably
so
not
well said.
it's not a moment. It's more of, you're being prepared to do something important for a long time. And so I think that's a very important element.
I love that. Very, so well said. So well said. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much for coming on and taking time out of your day to talk with us
Yeah.
about leadership and finance and mindset and all that good stuff. So thank you. And thank you to everybody who has tuned in and listens. Please make sure to subscribe, rate, follow, share with your friends, all that good stuff, so we can keep bringing you more amazing episodes that can make you happier, healthier, and wealthier. We'll see you next time.
Hey, your host here, Madison Malloy. Please make sure to subscribe to the show on all podcast platforms, and please rate and review us on iTunes and Spotify. Also, if you have any questions or comments, you can email us at contact@nexttomadison.com. I thank you again for listening. Bye.